My ex-wife laughed when I walked into that courtroom. Her ex-cop boyfriend whispered, "He's nothing," loud enough for everyone to hear. They had doctored photos, fake testimony, and $50,000 of my money hidden in a shell company. But then the judge recognized me. Her face went pale, her hand froze on the gavel, and she whispered words that made the entire room go silent. That's when they realized they'd made a terrible mistake. My name is Christopher Blake. I'm 45 years old, and I spent the last 2 decades building precision machinery, while my wife built a fantasy life with a man who used to carry a badge. Should have paid more attention when Stephanie started going to those community safety meetings. Should have noticed when she stopped asking about my day. Could have, would have, should have. That's the language of regret, and I spoke it fluently right up until the moment I walked into that courtroom. The door felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the weight of what I knew was coming, or maybe it was just the humidity that September morning in Columbus. Either way, I pushed through, briefcase in one hand, my daughter's favorite purple hair tie wrapped around my wrist like talisman. That's when I heard it. Stephanie's laugh. Not the genuine one from our wedding video, but this new theatrical version she perfected over the past year. Sharp, performative, designed to cut. She sat 3 rows back with Jason Porter, her new man, the ex-cop who'd somehow convinced her that a pension and a quick smile were worth throwing away 2 kids and a marriage. Jason leaned close to her, close enough that his cologne probably mixed with her perfume in some nauseating cloud. His voice carried just far enough. "He's nothing." 3 syllables. That's all it took. Stephanie laughed again, louder this time, and heads turned. Her sister Janet smirked. Jason's buddy from the department nodded like they'd just confirmed the punchline to a joke they'd been setting up for months. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, the way they taught us in basic training 25 years ago. Don't react. Don't engage. Just move forward with purpose. My lawyer, Eleanor Winters, sat at the defendant's table, 70 years old and sharper than most attorneys half her age. She glanced up at me, eyes steady, and gave the slightest nod. Then something shifted. Judge Rebecca Stratton entered from her chambers. She was arranging papers, half focused on the docket, when she looked up and saw me. The color drained from her face like someone had opened a valve. Her hand froze midway to her gavel. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Is that really him?" she said, barely above a whisper, but the courtroom acoustics carried it like she'd shouted. The room froze. Stephanie's laugh died in her throat. Jason's smirk faltered. Even the court reporter stopped typing, fingers hovering over the keys like she'd forgotten what came next. Judge Stratton stared at me for 3 full seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then she looked down at a sealed file on her bench, touched it once with her fingertips, and took a slow breath. Eleanor leaned toward me, without looking away from the judge. "That," she whispered, "is exactly what we wanted." I sat down, set my briefcase on the floor, and folded my hands. Stephanie was whispering urgently to Jason now, her face tight with confusion. He shrugged, but his confidence had evaporated like morning dew. The judge cleared her throat. "Let's begin." The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were always my long days at the plant, and I'd gotten home around 9 to find the envelope wedged in the screen door like a knife between ribs. Stephanie had left early that morning, without saying where she was going. Come to think of it, she'd been doing that a lot. I sat at the kitchen table, the one we'd bought at an estate sale 15 years ago, and read through 23 pages of legal dissolution. Stephanie Blake versus Christopher Blake. That little versus did something to me. We were supposed to be partners. Now we were opponents. She'd already moved half her clothes out. I hadn't noticed until that moment, standing there in our bedroom, staring at the empty hangers like they were evidence of something I'd been too blind to see. The bathroom counter was cleaner than usual. Her good perfume was gone. The photo of us from our honeymoon in Gatlinburg had been turned face down. I moved out 2 weeks later. Found a duplex on the east side of Columbus, the kind of place where the landlord still takes checks and doesn't ask too many questions. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from 1997. The faucet dripped constantly. I kept meaning to fix it, but never got around to it. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to that steady drip and wonder if this was what the rest of my life would sound like. Solitary, repetitive, slow erosion. Jake, my 14-year-old son, came over that first weekend. He walked through the place like he was touring a crime scene. hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched. Madison, my 8-year-old daughter, asked where her room was. I told her she'd have the bedroom, and I'd take the couch. She cried anyway. Mom said you wanted space. Jake said, not looking at me. He stood by the window, watching cars pass on the street below. That's not exactly how it happened. I said carefully. You have to be careful with kids during a divorce. Every word becomes ammunition later. She said you and her just grew apart. He turned to face me then. 14 years old, and already he had that look. The one that says he knows there's more to the story, but isn't sure he wants to hear it. I want to tell him the truth. That his mother had been seeing Jason Porter for at least 6 months before she filed. That I'd found text messages, deleted emails, credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to. But you don't do that to your kids. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sometimes things get complicated, buddy. I said instead. But you and Madison, you're my priority. Always. He nodded but didn't look convinced. That bothered me more than the divorce papers. More than the empty apartment. More than Stephanie's lawyer's smug voicemail about custody arrangements. My son didn't believe me anymore. That's when I started keeping records. Every conversation, every missed pickup, every time Stephanie changed the schedule without notice. I bought a small notebook, the kind with the black cover and the elastic band, and I wrote it all down. Dates, times, what was said, who was there. Eleanor Winters would later tell me that notebook saved everything. But that first night in the duplex, sitting on a couch that smelled like someone else's life, I just thought I was going crazy. Turned out, I was the only sane one left. 3 months into the separation, I started noticing patterns. Stephanie would cancel my weekends with the kids at the last minute, always with an excuse. Madison had a birthday party. Jake had a project due. The dog was sick. We didn't have a dog. I wrote it all down. Every cancellation, every excuse, every time Jason's truck was parked in my driveway during what should have been my custody time. I took photos from down the street. Timestamps, license plates, everything. Felt like a detective in my own life. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Garcia, our nanny for the past 2 years, called me on a Sunday evening. Her voice was tight, nervous. Mr. Blake, I need to talk to you about something, she said. Maria was from Guatemala, 30 years old, studying to be a paralegal at Columbus State. Smart woman. Too smart to miss what was happening in that house. We met at a coffee shop on High Street. She brought a small recording device, the kind you can buy at any electronics store. I recorded some things, she said, sliding across the table. Mrs. Blake, she doesn't know. Ohio is one-party consent. I checked. I stared at the device like it might explode. What's on it? Her and Jason. Planning things. Bad things. Maria's hand shook slightly. They talk about you like you're nothing. Like you don't exist. And they're planning to say you're unstable. That you threatened Mrs. Blake. My blood went cold. I never threatened anyone. I know. That's why I'm telling you. She pushed the recorder closer. There's 5 recordings. Different days. She asked me to lie. To sign a statement saying you drank around the kids. I told her no. She fired me 3 days ago. I looked at this woman who'd cared for my children, who just lost her job because she refused to destroy me, and something shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what kind of man I wanted to be. The kind who rolls over, or the kind who stands up. Thank you, I said. I'll make sure this matters. There's something else, Maria said quietly. Jason, he has a temper. I saw him grab Jake's arm once. Left a bruise. Jake said he fell, but I don't think he fell. Every muscle in my body tensed. When, 2 weeks ago, I took a photo. She showed me her phone. Clear image of finger marks on my son's bicep. I copied everything. The recordings, the photo, every detail she could remember. Then I called Eleanor Winters. We need to meet, I said. Tonight. Eleanor lived in German Village, one of those old brick houses that's been standing since before cars were invented. She answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in. I'll make coffee." I showed her everything. She listened to the recordings 3 times, made notes in that precise handwriting lawyers seemed to be born with, studied the photo of Jake's arm until I thought she might burn a hole through the screen. This changes everything, she said finally. But we have to be smart. Strategic. They think they're winning. Let them keep thinking that. Ow, she smiled. Not friendly. Tactical. We build the case quietly. Document everything. And we file a seal motion. The judge sees it before the hearing. before they even know what hit them. Eleanor spent the next 6 weeks turning my life inside out. Every bank statement, every email, every receipt. She had contacts, people who knew people, the kind of network you build over 40 years of practicing law in the same city. Your wife's been moving money, Eleanor said during one of our meetings. We sat in her office, surrounded by file boxes that seemed to multiply every time I visited. Small amounts. 500 here, 800 there, all going to an LLC registered to Jason Porter. For what? That's what we're going to find out. She handed me a printout. Blue Line Resource Management. Filed 4 months before Stephanie asked for the divorce. Jason's the sole owner. The address is a UPS store in Hilliard. Shell company. Very likely. And if they're moving marital assets through it without disclosure, that's fraud. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. How much are we talking total? 38,000 so far. I felt like I'd been punched. 38,000. From the joint account before she closed it. Then another 12,000 from her personal account. The one you thought was just for household expenses. Eleanor's expression didn't change. She'd seen worse. But for me, this was a gut punch wrapped in betrayal. I spent the next month doing exactly what Eleanor told me. I sold the fishing boat I'd been restoring. Didn't need it. Couldn't afford the storage anyway. Transferred my shares in the manufacturing plant to my business partner. Kept enough to stay involved, but reduced my liability. Stephanie wanted a target. I was making myself smaller, harder to hit. Every Tuesday and every other weekend, I showed up for the kids. Always on time, always prepared. I packed Madison's favorite snacks, the peanut butter crackers she'd eat by the sleeve if I let her. I went to Jake's soccer games, even the away ones that meant driving 2 hours each way. Stephanie would show up late with Jason, sitting in the stands like they owned the place. Jake started talking to me more. Not about big things, just small stuff. School, friends, a video game he was playing. But one night, as I was dropping him back at the house, he said something that made me stop. Jason's not a good guy, Dad. I turned to look at him. What do you mean? Just trust me. He's not. Jake got out of the car, then leaned back in. Mom doesn't see it. But I do. I wanted to ask more, but he was already walking toward the house. I sat there in the driveway, watching him go, and made a decision. Whatever it took, however long it took, I was getting my kids out of that situation. Eleanor filed the sealed motion 2 weeks before the court date. Judge Stratton received it directly, along with all our evidence. The recordings, the bank transfers, the LLC documentation, the photo of Jake's bruise, everything. We didn't tell Stephanie's lawyer. We didn't have to. Now we wait, Eleanor said. And we let them walk into court thinking they've already won. What if this doesn't work? She looked at me over her reading glasses. Christopher, I've been doing this since before you were born. Trust me. They're about to find out what happens when you underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Stephanie's lawyer, a guy named Richard Powell, strutted into the courtroom like he was about to win an Oscar. Young, mid-30s, the kind of attorney who practices expressions in the mirror. He had a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent and a suit that screamed, "I bill $400 an hour." He started with photos. Images of me looking exhausted, unshaven, distracted. One from when the plant had layoffs, and I worked 70-hour weeks to keep my team employed. Another from Madison's birthday, when Stephanie had changed the date without telling me, so I showed up a day late. Without context, I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. Your Honor, Powell said, his voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. What we see here is a pattern of parental disengagement. A father who's present in theory, but absent in practice. Stephanie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. On cue. Jason sat beside her in the gallery, arms crossed, nodding along like a judge at a talent show. Her sister Janet whispered something to the woman next to her. They both looked at me with pity. Or maybe contempt. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Then came the videos. Carefully edited clips of Madison, throwing tantrums, and Jake looking frustrated. Stephanie had stitched together the worst moments, added Jason's voice as narration. This is what happens after they spend weekends with their father, he said in the video, his tone suggesting I was poisoning them with something more than love. Powell played it twice. For effect. The children return emotionally dysregulated, he continued. Mrs. Blake has had to enroll them in counseling to address the anxiety caused by Mr. Blake's unstable living situation and unpredictable behavior. I felt Eleanor shift beside me. Not nervous. Ready. Like a boxer hearing the opening bell. Judge Stratton watched without expression. She'd already seen the sealed file that morning. I knew because Eleanor had confirmed it with the clerk. Stratton had spent 40 minutes reviewing our evidence before this circus even started. Powell kept talking. Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Blake has shown a pattern of resistance to modern co-parenting. He refuses to communicate through the court-approved app, insists on phone calls at inappropriate hours, and has repeatedly questioned decisions made in the best interest of the children. That last part was almost funny. I questioned why Jason was making medical decisions about my kids. Apparently, that was inappropriate. Stephanie took the stand. She wore a gray blazer that screamed, "Responsible mother," even though I'd never seen her wear it anywhere except court-related meetings. Her testimony was smooth, practiced. She talked about how I'd become withdrawn, how I'd stopped engaging with the family, how she tried everything to save the marriage before giving up. "I just want what's best for Jake and Madison," she said, voice breaking on their names. "They need stability. They need a home where they feel safe." "And do they feel safe with Mr. Blake?" Powell asked. "I think they love him," Stephanie said carefully. "But love isn't always enough. They need structure, consistency, things Christopher has struggled to provide." Jason leaned forward in his seat, giving her an encouraging nod, like they'd rehearsed this scene 100 times. Eleanor still hadn't moved. She just sat there, pen in hand, making occasional notes. When Powell finished his presentation with a flourish about protecting innocent children from parental instability, she simply wrote one word in the margin of her legal pad. I saw it from where I sat. Showtime. Powell had just finished his closing remarks when Judge Stratton leaned forward slightly. Not much, just enough to change the temperature in the room. "Mr. Porter," she said, her voice calm but edged with something sharp, "can you clarify your involvement in Blue Line Resource Management?" Jason blinked. Once. Twice. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. The LLC registered 4 months ago. The one that's received approximately $50,000 from Mrs. Blake's accounts." Stratton tapped a file on her bench. "The sealed one. You're listed as the managing member." The color drained from Jason's face like someone had pulled a plug. Stephanie's head whipped toward him. 50,000. What is she talking about? Powell stood quickly. "Your Honor, we weren't aware these financial matters would be under review today. We'd like to request a recess to examine the documentation." "Request denied," Stratton said without hesitation. The opposing counsel filed their materials within the legal window. You had equal opportunity to prepare. Eleanor stood. She didn't rush, didn't perform, just stood, lifted a thin folder from her briefcase, and walked to the bench like she was delivering morning coffee. "Your Honor, we've documented a series of transfers from Mrs. Blake's personal and joint accounts to Mr. Porter's company over a 6-month period. Each transaction coincides with dates when Mr. Porter and Mrs. Blake claim to be engaged in legitimate business consulting." Judge Stratton opened the folder. Her expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened slightly. She flipped through 3 pages, then looked up at Jason. "Mr. Porter, these are invoices. For services rendered, child development planning, household management consultation, financial restructuring. Is that accurate?" Jason's mouth opened. Closed. It was consulting work. Legitimate consulting. With no contract. Eleanor's voice remained steady. No business license for these services. No professional certifications in any of these fields. Silence. The kind that echoes. Stephanie grabbed Jason's arm. "You told me it was clean. You said it was just transfers between partners." "It was," Jason hissed back too loud. "You signed everything. You knew what you were doing." Powell tried to intervene. "Your Honor, I object to this characterization of legitimate business transactions between consenting adults." Stratton's eyes never left Jason. "Consenting adults can still commit fraud, counselor, especially when those transactions occur during divorce proceedings and aren't disclosed to the court." She turned to her clerk. "Schedule a forensic audit. I want complete bank record from both Mrs. Blake and Mr. Porter. All communications related to this LLC. And notify the Financial Crimes Unit. This may require further investigation." The room erupted in whispers. Stephanie's face went from confused to pale to something approaching panic. Janet stopped whispering. Jason looked like he was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Eleanor returned to our table and sat down. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Watch them unravel." Powell was flipping through his files like maybe there was a magic document that could save this. There wasn't. Stephanie grabbed her phone, started texting furiously. Jason sat perfectly still, staring at the judge like he'd just realized he'd walked into the wrong courtroom. Judge Stratton wasn't done. "Mrs. Blake, these transfers began 4 months before you filed for divorce. At the same time, you were claiming financial hardship and requesting increased spousal support. Would you like to explain that discrepancy?" Stephanie stood shakily. "I was told it was an investment. Jason said he was starting a legitimate business, and I was helping him get established. By moving marital assets without your husband's knowledge or consent, I didn't think I needed permission. We were separated. You filed 4 months after these transfers began," Stratton said, her voice sharp now, "which means these were marital assets. Subject to disclosure. Subject to division. None of which happened." The walls were closing in. I could see it in Stephanie's eyes, the moment she realized this wasn't going according to plan. Eleanor stood with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Maria Garcia to the stand." The courtroom doors opened, and Maria walked in. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, no jewelry except small earrings. She looked exactly like what she was, a working woman who decided truth mattered more than keeping her job. Stephanie's eyes went wide. She grabbed Powell's arm, whispered something urgent. He shook his head, looking confused. They hadn't expected this. Maria was sworn in. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, posture straight. Judge Stratton gave her an encouraging nod. "Ms. Garcia," Eleanor began, "you were employed by the Blake family for approximately 2 years. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am. I was the nanny for Jake and Madison. I also helped with household tasks and scheduling." "And when did your employment end?" 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Blake terminated me." Eleanor walked closer to the stand. "Can you tell the court why she terminated you?" Maria took a breath. "She asked me to sign a document. An affidavit. It said I had witnessed Mr. Blake drinking alcohol around the children and behaving erratically. She wanted me to testify to things that never happened." The courtroom stirred. Stephanie's face flushed red. Jason shifted in his seat. "And did you sign this document?" Eleanor asked. "No, ma'am. I told her I couldn't lie under oath. That's when she fired me." "During your employment, did you ever witness Mr. Blake drinking around the children or behaving inappropriately?" "Never. Mr. Blake was always appropriate with the children. Always on time, always prepared. He brought Madison her favorite snacks. He helped Jake with homework. He was a good father." Eleanor nodded. "Did you witness interactions between Mrs. Blake and Jason Porter that concerned you?" "Yes. Many times." "Can you describe those interactions?" Maria's hands tightened slightly. "They would talk about Mr. Blake like he wasn't a person, like he was just an obstacle. I heard them planning what to say in court. What lies to tell." Powell stood. "Objection. Hearsay. Not if she has recordings," Eleanor said calmly. She turned to Maria. "Ms. Garcia, did you make any recordings during your employment?" "Yes. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I was the consenting party." Eleanor handed a thumb drive to the clerk. "We have 5 audio files, all time-stamped and documented. Your Honor, we'd like to play the first one." Judge Stratton nodded. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. Stephanie's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Just move the money before he can track it. Christopher doesn't pay attention to the accounts anyway." Jason's voice followed. "Even if he does, what's he going to do? Show up to court and cry? The judge will eat him alive." Stephanie again. "We need to make him look unstable." Maria, "If we need you to write something, just something vague about his behavior, would you do that?" Click. The recording ended. The silence in that courtroom was absolute. Stephanie sat frozen, her face the color of ash. Jason stared straight ahead like maybe if he didn't move, nobody would notice him. Eleanor let the moment breathe. "Ms. Garcia, is that an accurate recording of a conversation you witnessed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Were there other conversations like this?" "4 more. All on the drive." Judge Stratton leaned forward. "Ms. Garcia, did either party ever instruct you to provide false testimony under oath?" Maria looked directly at Stephanie. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Blake did. Multiple times." Powell stood so fast his chair squeaked against the floor. Your Honor, we need to address a conflict of interest. My representation of both Mrs. Blake and Mr. Porter has become untenable given the nature of the evidence presented. Jason turned to stare at him. What are you saying? I'm saying you need your own lawyer. Powell's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. As of this moment, I'm severing representation with you, Mr. Porter. You can't do that, Jason said, his voice rising. We had an agreement. That agreement didn't include potential criminal conspiracy. Powell looked at Stephanie. Mrs. Blake, I strongly recommend you consider your position carefully before proceeding. Stephanie stood up in the gallery, her voice cracking. You're abandoning us? Now, I'm protecting myself from being complicit in fraud, Powell said flatly. Jason shot to his feet. This is insane. Those recordings are taken out of context. Stephanie, tell them it's not what it sounds like. Stephanie turned on him, her composure completely shattered. Not what it sounds like. You told me the LLC was legitimate. You said moving the money was smart planning. You said Christopher would never find out. You want to do it, Jason fired back. Don't act like I forced you. You signed every check. You knew exactly what was happening. I trusted you. Stephanie's voice echoed off the courtroom walls. You said you'd handled situations like this before. You said you knew how courts worked. I did handle it. You're the one who kept the nanny around too long. You're the one who got sloppy. Judge Stratton's gavel came down hard. Enough. Both of you. Sit down and be quiet or I'll have you removed. They sat, but the damage was done. The unified front had collapsed into rubble. Eleanor remained standing. Your Honor, given Mr. Porter's admission that he's handled situations like this before, we'd like to submit evidence of a prior complaint filed against him in Indiana. A domestic situation involving financial manipulation that was settled quietly but remains on record. She handed another document to the clerk. Mr. Porter has a pattern. Mrs. Blake is simply his latest victim, though in this case, she was a willing participant. Stratton reviewed the document, her expression hardening with each line she read. Mr. Porter, you're going to need counsel immediately. I'm issuing a restraining order effective today. You are not to contact Mrs. Blake, Mr. Blake, or either of the Blake children until this matter is resolved. Jason opened his mouth to protest. Don't, Stratton cut him off. I'm also referring this entire matter to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. They'll decide whether charges are warranted. She turned to Stephanie. Mrs. Blake, you have until Friday to produce complete financial records. All accounts, all transfers, all communication with Mr. Porter regarding money. If you fail to comply, I'll hold you in contempt. Stephanie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not the performance tears from earlier. Real ones. The kind that come when you realize you've destroyed everything and there's no going back. Eleanor sat down beside me. One more witness, she whispered. Then we bring it home. Dr. Sarah Brennan entered the courtroom carrying a thick binder and the kind of calm that comes from dealing with broken families for 30 years. Court-appointed psychologist, recommended by Eleanor, approved by Judge Stratton without hesitation. Your Honor, Dr. Brennan began, settling into the witness stand. I've completed comprehensive evaluations of both children. 6 sessions total over 3 weeks. 2 at school, 2 at the father's residence, 2 at the mother's residence. She opened her binder. At Mr. Blake's home, both children exhibited secure attachment behaviors. Jake was open about his feelings. Madison played freely and expressed comfort. The environment was consistent, predictable, safe. Judge Stratton leaned forward. And at Mrs. Blake's residence? Both children showed anxiety markers. Madison had difficulty sleeping. Jake mentioned feeling responsible for his mother's emotional state. Both children reported that Mr. Porter made them uncomfortable. Stephanie's shoulders hunched forward. Powell sat beside her, taking notes but saying nothing. Jake disclosed to me that Mr. Porter had grabbed his arm hard enough to leave bruises. He was afraid to tell anyone because he thought it would cause more conflict. Dr. Brennan's voice remained clinical, but her eyes showed compassion. Madison told me that her mother said if she talked too much about home, her daddy might not be allowed to see her anymore. My chest tightened. My little girl had been carrying that fear. In your professional opinion, Judge Stratton asked, where do these children feel most secure? With their father, unequivocally. Mr. Blake provides emotional stability, consistent routines, and appropriate boundaries. The children trust him. They don't trust the environment Mrs. Blake has created. Stephanie wiped her eyes. Real tears now, not performance. Dr. Brennan continued. I'm recommending primary custody with Mr. Blake. Mrs. Blake should have supervised visitation until she can demonstrate a stable, safe environment free from Mr. Porter's influence. Judge Stratton reviewed the written evaluation in silence. Then she picked up her pen and began writing. The sound of it scratching across paper was the only noise in the courtroom. Custody arrangement is revised, Stratton said finally. Primary physical custody is awarded to Christopher Blake, effective immediately. Stephanie Blake will have supervised visitation every other weekend, pending review in 3 months. Mr. Porter is not to be present during any visitation period. She looked directly at Stephanie. You put your children in harm's way. You prioritize your relationship with a con man over their safety. That ends today. Stephanie nodded, unable to speak. Stratton turned to me. Mr. Blake, your children will be released to you today. The court will provide documentation for their school and medical providers. I stood. Thank you, Your Honor. Eleanor touched my arm gently. We'd won. Not just custody. Truth. Outside the courthouse, the October air felt different. Cleaner somehow. The sky was that deep blue you only get in fall, and the leaves were starting to turn. Jason Porter had already left with a police escort. Judge Stratton had made it clear he wasn't welcome within 500 feet of any Blake family member. The criminal referral meant he'd have bigger problems soon enough. Stephanie stood on the courthouse steps, alone. Her sister had left. Her friends had vanished. Powell was already in his car, probably grateful to be done with the whole mess. She saw me walking toward my truck and called out, Christopher, wait. I stopped, turned. Eleanor had left to file paperwork, so it was just us. Just the two people who'd once promised forever to each other. I'm sorry, Stephanie said. Her voice was small, broken. I destroyed everything. I know that now. You did, I said simply. No anger in it. Just fact. Jason, he convinced me that you were the problem, that I deserve better. He made it all sound so reasonable. She looked down at her hands. I believed him because I wanted to. You made choices, Stephanie. Own them. I know. She looked up, mascara streaking her face. Are you going to keep the kids from me forever? No. They need their mother. But they need the real version, not whatever you became with Jason. I adjusted my briefcase. You want to rebuild that relationship. Prove you can put them first. Actually first, not just in words. She nodded. Can I call him tonight? Just to say goodnight. Supervised calls for now. Through the court app. Follow the rules, and maybe we can work towards something better. Thank you, she whispered. I walked to my truck without looking back. Jake and Madison were waiting at Eleanor's office, probably nervous about what came next. I needed to get to them. Tell them everything would be okay now. My phone buzzed. Text from Eleanor. The prosecutor's office just called. They're moving forward with charges against Porter. Fraud, attempted witness tampering, assault. He's looking at real time. Good. Some people needed to face consequences. 9 months later, Jake made honor roll. Madison started sleeping through the night again. Stephanie completed parenting classes and started therapy. We'd moved to supervised but flexible visitation. She was trying. Actually trying. The manufacturing plant promoted me to senior director. The raise meant I could finally fix that leaking faucet in the duplex. Or maybe just move somewhere better. Jason Porter took a plea deal. 18 months in county jail, restitution to Stephanie and me, permanent restraining order. He never touched my family again. One Saturday afternoon, Jake and I were throwing a football in the backyard of our new rental house. Madison was drawing on the patio. Dad, Jake said, catching the ball. You knew all along, didn't you, that you'd win? No, I told him honestly. I knew I had to fight. Winning wasn't guaranteed. But fighting for you and your sister? That was never a question. He nodded, threw the ball back. I'm glad you did. Me too, buddy. Me too.